Hi, everyone. Welcome. It is Thursday, June 30th, and we are here with Sujatha Baliga and Aisha Shahidah Simmons for Keeping It Real, Avoiding Spiritual Bypass on the Path to Liberation. I want to welcome our speakers on behalf of everyone at Seichen Ling. We had them here for a talk last year on anger, social justice, and Buddhism. And it was so well received. We got such great feedback. So we're delighted to have them back. And this topic on spiritual bypass actually grew from that initial conversation. And we heard from people, and I agreed that it was really a way where we looked at, as Dharma practitioners, like where the work can really take place, right? Where the Dharma hits the road, so to speak. So we welcome both of them back with us tonight. Sujatha Baliga's work is characterized by an equal dedication to crime survivors and people who've caused harm. A former victim advocate and public defender, she speaks publicly and inside prisons about her own experiences as a survivor of child sexual abuse and her path to forgiveness. Her personal and research interests include the forgiveness of seemingly unforgivable acts, survivor-led movements, restorative justice's potential impact on racial disparities in our legal systems, and Buddhist approaches to conflict transformation. A longtime FPMT student, she's a member of the Gyuto Foundation in Richmond, California, where she leads meditation on Monday nights. And she was named a 2019 MacArthur Fellow. Aisha Shahidah Simmons is an award-winning Black feminist lesbian cultural worker who's examined the intersections of race, gender, sexuality, and sexual violence for over 25 years. A survivor of childhood and adult sexual violence, committed to healing and non-carceral accountability, Aisha is the editor of the 2020 Lambda Literary Award-winning anthology, Love with Accountability, Digging Up the Roots of Child Sexual Abuse. She's also the producer and director of the Ford Foundation funded film, No, the Rape Documentary. Aisha has received numerous awards and fellowships, including selection for the 2022 Changemakers Authors Cohort and a 2020 Soros Media Fellowship. She's a 20-year Buddhist student and practitioner, formerly in the SN Goenka tradition for 17 years, and presently in the Insight tradition. With that, again, welcome on behalf of everyone at Seichen Ling, and I'll turn things over to Sujatha so she can set our motivation for the evening.
Wonderful. Thank you everyone for coming, and thank you so much, Aisha, for continuing to be in conversation with me about these topics that I know are very close to both of our hearts. It's just a joy, and especially thank you to Seichen Ling, where I have learned so much from all the labor of everyone who is involved there and all the wonderful teachings I've received at Seichen Ling. So tonight, let's start by setting our motivation for being together. To engage in this discussion so that, and thinking about this topic, not just to be of benefit to ourselves, but also to others. And as we start, let's just start with these wishes within our own heart. May I keep my heart and mind open. May I be gentle with myself and with others as I consider these topics. Tonight, may I lean in here and learn things that help nudge me towards freedom from emotions and responses that no longer serve me or the good things I aspire to in this world. So let's start with those motivations. And then let's just spend a minute or so in a little bit of breath observation, if you'll join me, helping ourselves come to a place of more calmness, just watching your breath coming and going, either your belly rising and falling, or maybe you can feel some sensations of your breath coming and going at your nostrils. Just taking a moment to notice that your breath is here, your first and most dear and constant friend, who's very good actually at giving you important information about your state of mind, our state of mind, without any sense of judgment. The breath is always there, letting us know how we're doing. So let's give the breath right now some focused attention, like you would to a good dear friend, giving them that kind of attention that you would to a dear friend. Let's spend a moment doing that now. When you find your mind is wandering, simply return to the sensation of the breath as it comes and goes at its own natural pace. Thank you, everyone. I'm going to turn it over to Aisha to get us started with her thoughts and remarks on the topic tonight. Aisha, I'll just hand it over to you.
All right. Thank you, Sujatha. Thank you. Thank you again to to you for first inviting me to be in public conversation with you last fall, and to Che Chin Ling for inviting us to come back. And to me, it feels like when we talked about anger and social justice, that it feel like to me talking about avoiding spiritual bypass on the road uh, to liberation just really feels like a wonderful segue. So I want to just start out with just joy. Today is my youngest niece's birthday, Kylan Nicole Simmons. She turned 10 today. And I know she's not watching this event, and she may never see it. But I just want to acknowledge and celebrate her 10th dance around the sun. And when I think about practice and cultural work, I think about the future generations, not only in my bloodline in this lifetime, but all who are connected through our shared humanness. What are the lessons I can share with them? And what are the lessons they are teaching me? So I foreground some of my thoughts in honor of Kylan's 10th birthday today. I recently completed teaching an intimate 4-week class series on the Brahma Viharas to 14 diasporic Black women and femmes based across the US. For some who may not know what the Brahma Viharas are, I recognize, there's a wide audience here. I'll just offer a brief description that the historical Buddha taught his monks to awaken 4 states of mind called the Brahma Viharas, or the 4 divine states of dwelling. They're sometimes called the great abodes, or the divine dwellings, or divine abodes. They are 4 expressions of love in their purest and fiercest sense. The 4 qualities are metta, loving kindness, karuna, compassion, mudita, sympathetic or vicarious joy, and upekkha, equanimity, sometimes referred to as balance. They're each characteristics of freedom that build on each other. And it's important to note that they're not emotions, though. That it's you're cultivating and dwelling in each of these states, supporting and loosening the bonds of self-reference and ego, and practicing them support our skillfully working with life's vicissitudes without suppressing or denying our emotions. So each week of the 4-week class, I focused on one of the 4 qualities. And as fate would have it, our final class was on June 25th, this past Saturday, 24 hours after we learned the Supreme Court's decision to overturn Roe v. Wade. So the focus of that last class was on upekkha, equanimity, and also because it was a closing class, how can we apply the 4 weeks worth of teachings in practical and realistic ways? And I reflect on that because I mean I knew this talk was coming, and I was reflecting on it as preparing for this evening, because one of the things that I was so aware of was that it could have been very easy to slip into what I view as a form of spiritual bypass, i.e., just be equanimous or balanced while either walking or being thrown into the fire. Yes, equanimity is key. I want to be really clear. And and it would have been a tremendous disservice to bypass what was on everyone's minds and hearts in that class. I believe that equanimity, like loving kindness, like compassion, like vicarious joy, it's potent and powerful. And I believe it's critical to teach these practices in ways that don't deny our apparent realities in the name of the ultimate reality. And what happened, because I know I was not equanimous, but I was home. I was not unleashing my despair and fury at the time that I heard received the word around the ruling. But I did have my practice, my understanding, my growing understanding of these really profound and powerful liberating teachings about how to tune in and not zone out. And I think as a result, it was a really powerful class. And I really believe that the power in that class, I mean, all the classes were very moving, but there was something really powerful, was about like, here is a concrete opportunity to explore, what does practicing equanimity look like? What does practicing loving kindness and compassion look like, especially for those who don't think like us? Whoever us is, depending on what side or any spectrum that we're on. And so I share all this because I strive to be especially mindful about teaching practices that could be, and I know in my own lived experiences, misconstrued as denying one's realities in the name of the ultimate reality. I also believe that in addition to talking about spiritual bypassing, it's important to know culture, especially when, for many of these teachings, they originate in Asia. Buddha was a South Asian man. And so I think it's really important to that, because in a Western context, so many of these practices are interpreted and initially taught by everyone who brings their own cultural identity, their own biases, their own understandings. And so I think that this is why we have to walk that very, and I say this as a non-Asian person, walk a very compassionate, mindful, delicate, humble line as we understand, as we practice, as we teach or engage with these very ancient teachings. So I want to share a little bit about my own history. So in my 20 years of practicing Vipassana meditation, 17 years was in a lineage where I experienced, observed a lot of fertile ground for spiritual bypass. And for years, I was aware that I had to compartmentalize myself to stay on the path that I was taught. Early on, I learned that talking about my race, my gender, sexuality, and or forms of social and political activism were not welcomed, because they were viewed and taught as a deterrent to the spiritual path. Everything was focused on the ultimate reality while denying the apparent reality. I wasn't ever okay with this line of teaching and thinking, precisely because I am a Black feminist lesbian survivor. I am a culture worker. I am a social justice activist. And I am a Buddhist who was raised Sufi Muslim. In hindsight, I subconsciously put myself in unhealthy knots to contextualize and tolerate these, at best, inadvertent forms of systematic oppression expressed in the name of Dhamma or Dharma. As a survivor of sexual violence, it's also a very slippery slope. I once had a teacher explain to me that my adult harm doer's action against my adolescent body was a result of misplaced passion, a defilement. It was such a detached conversation that once again denied my apparent reality. In essence, I was asked to consider the karma that my harm doer will or would have inherited. He's an ancestor now, and the karma I must have inherited that resulted in such actions. I understand that this may be a very slippery slope for some who are listening. It is not my intention to get into a debate, if you will, about karma. What I'm offering is that it was unskillful commentary to share with a survivor of sexual violence. It was especially unskillful because the teacher was a white heterosexual man who never identified himself as a survivor of sexual violence. He could have been, I don't know, who was talking to a black lesbian woman survivor of childhood sexual abuse. And so in this very vulnerable spiritual space where I'm trying to seek some understanding about my current reality as a survivor, I was asked essentially to bypass that and think about the ultimate reality. This is for me one of many acute examples of spiritual bypassing that I've experienced and witnessed, an absolute avoidance of dealing with what is right in front of us. Now, I want to be clear that I believe in both and not either or. We can and should talk about apparent and ultimate realities, especially in spiritual contexts. About 4 weeks ago, I returned to a place that 33 years ago I once called one of my homes, and that is Overeaters Anonymous. I came to painful grips with an eating disorder that has wreaked havoc in my life. I also, through Overeaters Anonymous, recently discovered Recovery Dharma, which is a profound balm on my healing journey with my food disorder. I share about my eating disorder in the context again of spiritual bypass because I used to believe that a strong meditation practice would cure this illness. I thought my inability to have a healthy relationship with food was because I wasn't being equanimous or mindful with food. And yes, there is absolute truth to that, without a doubt. Simultaneously, I was doing myself a disservice thinking that I'm sitting twice a day for an hour at each sitting. I'm going on extended meditation retreats ranging from 10 to 30 days. Why am I not equanimous with food? I always had therapy, but there were some in my former community that frowned upon the therapy. It was kind of assumed that I must not be practicing properly. What I've come to realize is that I don't live a monastic life. And many of us are householders who must engage with the world in order to literally survive. I think it is profound and beautiful for those who are able to live a monastic life. So I want to be clear, this is not any kind of disparaging comments around that. It is just acknowledging the reality of myself and the many of whom I know who are practitioners, but and are also living in the world. And in my opinion, it is in this engagement that we can do a disservice by only focusing on ultimate realities, in the absence of in the absence of sorry, my phone is ringing. In the absence of the apparent reality, I don't believe it is an either ultimate or apparent realities. I believe that we must study and practice both. I've been fortunate to have meaningful friendships with Dharma kin, including Sujatha, which has led to my being able to co-present with her. My sisters, Glenda Gracia and Rima Vasily Flad, and Jonathan and Carolyn Crawley, then Maury Soundarajaran and Yasmin Sayadallah, and then teachers who've really helped me to do some deep digging, including Tereri Sala, Conda Mason, Dara Williams, Zinju Earthling Manuel, Shantae Smalls, and Gina Sharp. And definitely from afar and without question, Thich Nhat Hanh, who is one of my new ancestral guiding lights. He was a guiding light when he was living, and now he is definitely one as an ancestor. They've all shared so many examples of how to be engaged with the suffering, how not to run from it, how to turn to it, while taking care and seeing that as a path to one's liberation. So I believe that when we can support people's experiential understanding of their all apparent realities, that we are in fact helping them to tap in to the ultimate reality. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Aisha, that was so, as always, brilliant and moving. And I'm like, oh, I have to talk next. Oh my goodness. I'm trying to soak in all that brilliance. And just really grateful for all of your words and your vulnerability and your honesty and keeping it real as always. So thank you. Right on topic. So a little bit about how I'll spend my time chatting with you all tonight. I'll start sort of with an early experience of my first witnessing or understanding of spiritual bypass in my own life. I'm very grateful that I had an early lesson in that. And then I'll talk about how I have actually used spiritual bypassing against myself to avoid compassionate responses to my own suffering. And then thinking a bit about weaponized spiritual bypassing against others and the suffering of the planet and what work I'm doing within myself to try to avoid it. So I'll close out with that. So to start, I've thought quite a bit about this tendency to skip over the suffering of myself or others with religious or spiritual platitudes. And I think it's a particular danger for a glass half full kind of human, which I tend to be most of the time. But it really is about giving a free pass to having to do something about suffering and using lofty truisms or even things that might actually be true, as Aisha alluded to, right? But it's not being offered at the right time or for the right reasons, right? It's not skillfully being offered. So I'm going to think about, again, it's a very thorny topic, and they say karma is the most inscrutable of all things. And so it's very dangerous to actually bring it up, especially when I myself have so much to learn about it. But I'll tell you a story about pretty early in my life. I was like 8 or 9 years old, and we were in India at the time. And I saw someone on the street with leprosy, was starving as well. And I expressed concern or desire to do something about this to an auntie who I was with. And she very explicitly told me that it wasn't any of my business. There was nothing I could do about it. There's nothing that we could do about it. She was speaking in the we. And she said that it was simply them reaping the rewards of their past negative karma. And she almost had this like haughtiness about it, like we're better than them. And it was pretty brutal. And so I didn't like that. But if I'm honest with myself, I think that my 9-year-old self probably felt some level of relief about being let off the hook for a problem that felt beyond my capacity to solve. But at that same time, my gut was telling me that this is not the full picture. And I was walking with my mother, who squeezed my hand really hard when it was happening. I'll never forget that, sort of like there was like a visceral like yuck. And we separated ourselves a little bit, and my mother started talking to me. And she wasn't going to let that gross misunderstanding of karma stand. And she sort of had this private conversation with me where she told me, first of all, that's not how karma works. And we won't go into all of that because I think my mother's ideas may still be different from what my current understanding of karma is today. But regardless, she informed me that I should never, ever concern myself with guessing anyone else's past karma. And she said, rather, that I should, if I'm going to be judgmental about anyone's karma, the only karma that I might judge is my own future karma, especially the negative future karma I might reap by not being concerned with someone else's suffering. And so that was a very, very deep lesson for me, not just in how I think about karma, but also in how not to spiritually bypass with regards to oppression and suffering that I see in the world. And it was interesting because I didn't feel like at that moment she put it on me to solve that problem, but she just was giving me a general understanding, like, this is the way you think about this. Only think about yours and only think about the future. And so in thinking about how I use spiritual bypassing, I want to start with myself. I want to talk about how it is that if I want to avoid using spiritual bypass to overlook the suffering of others, then I need to not weaponize spiritual bypassing against myself. And I do this sometimes. I use it against myself to think, if I were more advanced, right? I mean, it's a lot of what Aisha was describing, and I do this to myself, right? If I understood the non-binary, non-dualistic way in which the whole universe truly operates, I wouldn't get so ruffled when people are like racist to me or when people are sexist towards me, and I would be beyond all that, right? And I do still, even though like cognitively I know, right, that this is not an appropriate response. There's sort of this visceral, automatic sort of gaslighting of myself that I do by saying, that's not the true reality. And so I'm trying to be more and more aware of it in myself, because I think that if we treat ourselves a certain negative way, then it's likely that we're going to be doing it to others as well, right? And so this is a really great place to start. So instead, what I try to remember is that these things are real, that I have suffered things in my lifetime, and that I can use my own experiences of these real things in relative reality. These things are truly happening. And my knowledge and wisdom that comes from my own experiences can help me both be better aware of other people's suffering and to start to think about solutions to these problems. And really to just pause when I feel that feeling of like, why is this still bothering me? To remember, there's relative and there's absolute reality, and this is actually occurring in relative reality. And how might I take this moment to be aware that this is actually happening at this moment? And what can I learn from this to have some sort of healing balm for myself and some ideas about how we might collectively move forward in a good way. And I want to say this next thing very gently, which is that the spiritual bypassing that I do sometimes I'm using it as a way of letting myself off the hook for the work that I need to do. So there's almost like, there's this phrase like, it is what it is. And it doesn't give me my autonomy to actually address a harm, right? If I say, I'm not there yet and that it's beyond me, then I don't give myself a ramp on to being able to attend to it in a more meaningful way. So one of the questions that was asked, in how we said we were going to talk about this tonight is sort of a why. Why do we do this? And I think for me personally, it is to avoid responsibility. And so sometimes when people are complaining, I personally take it, they may be telling me something that I'm doing that is harming them, but sometimes they're just telling me something they're suffering with. And I personally feel like it is my responsibility to fix it, to do something about it. And so when I'm noticing myself tending towards wanting to give them sort of some loftier way of seeing it, some other way of seeing it, it's really actually bypassing this moment. What they're really asking for is maybe just to let me know that they're in pain and that they actually don't require anything of me but to listen. But sometimes people are actually saying, hey, that thing that you're doing is hurtful and I need you to stop. And so when I use spiritual bypassing at that time, which I try not to do out loud anymore, I may have done it a couple times in the past, but what I can see is that it's a really, truly, truly hurtful thing to do. It's in a sense the very worst form of gaslighting, because there's this like way in which these ultimate truths can really, what is gaslighting? Ultimately, it's about messing with people's ability to appropriately apprehend their own reality. And when you tell them there's this loftier reality that you're not tapping into, how cruel is that to be doing that at a time when they're telling you about suffering that they're having, period, let alone a suffering that you yourself may have caused, right? I myself may have caused, prefer to speak in the I. And we've seen this happen, that instead of taking responsibility, people say, if you were more spiritually advanced, then you wouldn't be so upset about this, right? And we have seen this in spiritual communities, like institutions lifting up virtues like forgiveness or reconciliation, both of which I'm a huge fan of. They are virtues, right? But to utilize them at that moment, by institutions after having allowed sexual harm, for example, to run unchecked through their community, the bypass here is that of accountability, and that is wildly inappropriate. And so, I think it's okay for us to sit and say this has happened inside spiritual and religious communities, and to think we are not negating the ultimate truths by pointing out times in which they're being inappropriately used to sidestep responsibility for addressing genuine harms that occur within our communities. So I think that is a really important thing to name. But more often than not, it's actually more on the subtle side. So there are many suffering-related conversations that get shut down with what I recently heard of being referred to as thought-terminating cliches. I really love this expression. So somebody says something really terrible, and somebody's like, "It is what it is," or "It's in God's hands," or, my aunties, "That's their karma," or even like, "I'm doing something really dumb, YOLO," it's really, talk about a thought-terminating cliche. Like, actually, that's not really a wise way to think about that, right? And actually, when you think about most platitudes have this propensity, they may be true, but the danger of them bleeding into the spiritual bypass, like everything happens for a reason, or it was for the best, or this was my favorite, they're in a better place now. Like, do you know that? Are you clairvoyant? Like, do we really know that? It was a blessing in disguise. Or my favorite thing that we do to kids all the time, "You'll understand when you're older." So it's true, right, that we might actually learn later in life that it was a blessing in disguise. Like, I can think of some of the worst things that have ever happened to me, and ultimately they were wonderful material to work with on my own path out of my own suffering, right? But really, nobody else should ever tell me that, unless they are somebody who's extremely skillful, right? Or someone who I have asked for some of these deeper bits of knowledge and wisdom. And I think it's also the bypass is really the skipping the step, which is that by going straight to the blessing in disguise, we are asking people to not look all the way into the belly of the beast, right? Like, we're just saying we're going to bypass the facts and get right to this blessing in disguise. So what we need to do is actually sit with the sorrow before finding our way out of it. You can't skip the first noble truth, right? We can't bypass knowing the suffering within ourselves and within the world. We have to truly understand it. So if I'm honest with myself, my true confessions is that sometimes, especially with those closest to me, when they've been suffering something for a really long time, I have a secret wish that I do not verbalize, but I do have this like, gosh, I hope they will move on from that anger they have towards that person someday. Gosh, sometimes there's a little arrogance mixed in, if I'm being completely honest. Someday they'll see beyond the narrow way they're thinking about this right now. And I try my best not to say this stuff out loud, but especially those closest to me, I don't have any poker face at all. And so people can feel it, I think, from me through my silence and my face. And that alone is a way of expressing sort of this secret spiritual bypassing I'm doing in my own mind. And it's so interesting to me that I do this, even though I deeply dislike it when others do it to me, right? It's such an interesting thing to notice. So, and so another place in which I do some spiritual bypassing is around the suffering of the planet. So, in the past, I'm a lawyer by training, and I have worked with crime survivors for many years who've suffered the worst harms imaginable. I was also a death penalty lawyer. So I have a stomach for some pretty horrible stuff. But the one thing I have like zero capacity to manage, and I have deep, deep, deep reverence and respect for, are people who deal with environmental degradation and what we are doing to the planet itself. It is not it's not a strength I have right now to really sit with the totality of what is happening to the earth. And so, but I know, and I notice that I do a little bit of spiritual bypassing in my own mind, thinking about like the infinity of time and space and planets come and go, like that kind of thing. But then when I hear other people doing it, oh, it really troubles me. And then it really holds up a mirror. So the other day I heard somebody I really love say, oh, the planet will survive. It's just us people who are going to have to go, and we deserve to go because we're the ones who caused all this. And I had this visceral reaction, like, first of all, that's not true. Like, the planet itself and all of its species, not just humans, will be irreparably harmed. Like Bhumi Devi, like Mother Goddess Earth herself, her rivers and her oceans and her mountains are all being harmed. And even if it weren't her and all the other species who are utterly undeserving of all of this, the human species matters. It's a very precious species. And even if it is our fault, which is not even true, it's not everybody's fault, right? We still deserve not to suffer, right? And so that kind of thinking, like humans will go and the earth will recover. Wow, that's like a big spiritual bypass. I think about spiritual, like what might start to smell like spiritual bypass as self-care sometimes too. So I want to talk about this, which is like an interesting little twist in my mind. When things are really bad, I tend to default to my happy place, which is thinking this thought, like there's this big infinite universe and I'm so small, and ultimately I don't really exist the way I think I do, and nothing exists the way I think I do. And so I think of this as like avoidance through infinite universe thinking. and it shows itself up in my life with like binge scrolling through images of like the Hubble. Like I will spend a lot of time on those NASA websites being like, look at the beautiful nebula all the way out there. And and I just got super excited. Yesterday's headline, this Webb telescope is coming online in July, and it says deepest image of our universe ever taken by the Webb telescope will be revealed in July. And I'm like super excited because I'm like, January 6th hearings, the end of Roe v. Wade, and all of this stuff is going to be ameliorated by these Webb images. They can't show up soon enough, right? And so I don't want to be too hard on myself about it, because there's a positive aspect to this, right? It is wonderful to get some perspective with the big things like the universe is infinite, or things like there are countless Buddhas and Bodhisattvas and Buddha fields. And I have many lifetimes to get this right. Like these things are also true from my own religious perspective, right? And that sometimes we might need to look away long enough to take care of ourselves, and do it for as long as we need to in order to keep looking back at the suffering of ourselves and others. So, again, it's a cliche, but it's so accurate about putting the oxygen mask on myself. Like, when am I using the Hubble scrolling? It's like binge scrolling Hubble and Webb, soon to be Webb photos as that oxygen mask, right? And even in meditation, like when do I need to go away on retreat? When do I need to grow within myself, like a growing feeling of bliss and pliancy within my own body, within my own being, through meditation practice, so that I can be of greater benefit to myself and others. And to remember that that these things, like, is my motivation to check out for a long time, or is it to do what I need to do in order to be able to come back and attend to the suffering of the people I know and the people I don't know? So I want to just share a few thoughts on like how to avoid it, and things I've been thinking about. How might I be better at avoiding it? Spiritual bypassing, and particularly weaponized spiritual bypassing. And sort of some antidotes to it. And I think within myself, when I think about how can I avoid it, it's really a lot about humility, patience, and compassion. So with regard to myself, remembering that there are some things that I am just scratching the surface of healing within myself. At the age of 50, there are some things that I have not even begun to really get at. And so it's going to take some time. Right. And that there are other things that I have done an immense amount of work on, and I can see how far I've come, but I forget that like some of those things took 25 years to get here. Right. And so patience with myself, before assuming it should just be over by now, because I know that my problem itself is actually empty of inherent existence, et cetera. Right. Can I just offer myself the same kind of compassion and healing that I would give to someone else I love? right? I would never tell somebody that their problem was empty of inherent existence. Like that would be really, really obnoxious, but I do it to myself. And so how can I be better at that? And at the same time, I want to be sure that I'm not giving myself a free pass through this sort of infinite universe thinking, right? Like there is suffering here in my life, and there are things that I do want to change. And so am I using the sort of, it is what it is, when there's actually something that I can be doing to help myself move forward in a good way? And in thinking about others, when I feel the desire for people to move past their own suffering, and when they probably see it on my non-poker face, what I'm noticing is that I'm not thinking about them. I'm thinking about my own dislike of their situation, whether or not I caused it, right? It's not may you not suffer, it's may I not suffer your suffering anymore. That's often what is actually happening with me, more often than I would like to admit, that where there is attachment, I am usually disliking my own suffering, their suffering, not so much just their suffering. And so, so then I just pause, like the pause is really good. Did I take sufficient time to just sit with their suffering? Did I choose for someone else when it was time to move towards solutions or the ultimate answer? Did anyone even ask me for a solution or the ultimate answer is a really tough question that I have to be honest that mostly people don't ask for that. They just want to be listened to for the most part. And am I moving sort of upwards and outwards to, infinity to avoid my own discomfort with their situation? Am I moving upwards and outwards to avoid my own accountability in the situation that they're talking about? So I love this hashtag that I used to use all the time. This is also true. When terrible things happen and we're really feeling hopeless, I don't believe that it is spiritual bypassing. I was struggling with this last week when I just saw so many sad things on Facebook and Instagram. People are just devastated by all the things, right? And so many people are. And so, I posted on Facebook, if you can, folks, go look to the horizon. Please stop doom scrolling and go outside and look to the horizon. It's always there, no matter how far off it may be. And I hesitated. I was like, I'm giving a talk on spiritual bypass. Am I doing that right now? Am I encouraging people to do that right now? But I think, I really love this phrase, both and, can we look at the horrible things that are happening and also the counterpoint? It's almost as if it's a Venn diagram, right? And our truth lives in the middle of those two things. And what I have to do is be careful when we rush to the both and. That's true, and this is also true. Am I saying and meaning instead? Like you're telling me this horrible thing, and I'm like, but also and this. But it's more of a but instead of an and. And so can we try really hard to make the and a true and instead of an instead? And I want to close out with a couple thoughts that I love that Aisha raised Thich Nhat Hanh, who is just really what a teacher he has been for me my whole life. Just been so blessed, and particularly by the precepts from the Order of Interbeing. When I first read them, I was like, oh, I get to be this political human being that I am. And by political, I don't mean like partisan political. I mean like deeply committed to upending oppression, political. That is what I mean by it. And when I read The Order of Interbeing, it was just such a wonderful invitation to really not eschew or put aside relative reality for absolute realities that exist in these larger, loftier ways. And there's 3 of them that I would like to read. You go back and read the whole Order of Interbeing someday. It's really beneficial. I think there's 12 of them in total, but I'm going to read you just a few of these because I find them to really be good guides to avoiding spiritual bypass. So number 4 is, do not avoid contact with suffering or close your eyes before suffering. Do not lose awareness of the existence of suffering in the life of the world. Find ways to be with those who are suffering, including personal contact, visits, images, and sounds. By such means, awaken yourself and others to the reality of suffering in the world. Gosh, when I just, before I go on, I just think so much about Aisha's work as a cultural worker and her films and her writing, and just how beautifully that aligns with that number 4. And number 10 is, do not use the Buddhist community for personal gain or profit, or transform your community into a political party. A religious community, however, should take a clear stand against oppression and injustice, and should strive to change the situation without engaging in partisan conflicts. And the last one, number 12, that I want to read is just so simple, but it is so active in this world, right? It is just like literally telling us what to do here and now. Number 12 is, do not kill. Do not let others kill. Find whatever means possible to protect life and prevent war. Oh, so beautiful. And so I think I will close with that and move us into the next part of our conversation, which is Aisha and I are going to ask each other questions, a couple of questions, and we're going to open it up for Q&A. Yeah. So let's start with that. And I'll start, Aisha. I want to start with, I guess I'm wondering about your current path now and what it is that gives you the most. I mean, you've talked about this, the Brahma Virahas, and but other things maybe right now that help you hold that both and in a way that doesn't make it either or. Are there other practices or things that you're noticing in your own spiritual life that are building that muscle for both and, so as to not do a bypass?
Yeah. Wow. Okay. That's such a powerful question, and thank you. Well, first, thank you for your sharing, Sujatha, for sharing, with the saying, the personal is political. So starting, sharing from your personal experiences and then going outward. I think it's so important to look at the ways in which we are doing whatever it is that we're supposed to be talking about, right? Like, it's so easy to say what others are doing, and it's really hard to say what we're doing. And I'm still sitting with the ties, virtues, if you will, from the order of interbeing, just so powerful. So it's interesting because I would say that when I think about my work, Love with Accountability, which is it is now an anthology. It started out with as a project, and I remember, Sujatha, before it even became a project, I remember processing it out loud with you in fall of 2015. Just saying what I wanted to do, and talking about Love with Accountability, and that comes straight out of my practice. It in terms of, very long story short, very short, I already established that I was a survivor of childhood sexual abuse, and my parents were bystanders. They're divorced, incredible human rights activists, and I was really trying to push them to deal with how they didn't protect me. And they, at the time, were not able or willing, both probably, to face it, right? To face that they had dedicated their lives to all forms of oppression in various parts of the world, and yet did not address this egregious form of oppression committed against their daughter. I share all of that they kind of shut down, and I remember like sitting on my cushion. I was also in therapy. I believe in therapy. So, but I just really remember, because I couldn't make them do it, and I just was just like, like I felt like I was going to implode in many ways, but just kind of sitting, thinking again about cultivating equanimity. And it was in that process that like literally the words Love with Accountability emerged. It was very much, and to me, and I answer the question in this way, I answer your question this way, because for me it is both and, right? Like, because it was just like, that was what was being held as a shield. We love you, and I was just like, I don't doubt your love, but your love, my love, is not going to shield you from being accountable to me. And so for me, it was both and. Like, yes, I know that they love me. I believe that they probably did the best that they knew what to do at the time. You know, if they could do it again, differently, or at least I believe that they would. So I think, and I would offer that it was the process of just of sitting and literally feeling like I was in a literal fire. It was a metaphorical fire centered around my cushion at the apartment of my time at the time in Philadelphia, and just being with it, and also reflecting on my grandfather, who was the person who caused harm against me as a child. It's the same person who terrorized me as a child, also took care of his wife for the last 10 years of her life, my grandmother, when she had Alzheimer's. So because of him, she never set foot in a nursing home. They were supposed to retire and live the retired life, and then that's when she started losing her memory. And so they didn't move and do all that, and he took care of her. Never set foot in a nursing home, and the only time she was in the hospital were the last 3 days of her life. So how do I hold that, right? Is it, it's somebody looking at us and, oh, he was a monster. He committed monstrous acts, no doubt about it. But he wasn't a monster. That wasn't the sum total of him. This is the same person who also took care of his wife. So I honestly, I do believe it's been, and this was before I even had a full understanding of the Brahma Viharas like I have now. But I do believe, for me, and I really honor all religions, but I believe for me it was my understanding and my practice of Vipassana meditation, my reading the suttas, that really helped me to kind of broaden my understanding of good, bad, evil, all of that. That it's just it's all there, all of it, and I think that that's also what supports my growing commitment of being an abolitionist, right? Like, yes, again, people commit heinous acts, but I don't believe that's the sum total. And so and that's the hard work. That is the hard work, and I'm sharing it now. This is an ongoing process. I haven't arrived. I still, get upset, flipped out, all of that. So I want to be clear. I think what is happening as I age, and deepen my practice, and really I'm beginning more and more to turn towards the practice. Like, I'm still going to be a culture worker, but I'm really interested in healing. Rima Vesley Flad says, what does it look like? What would our lives look like if we could? And it can be a privilege for many of us, put healing at the center. And so I think when it is that work that Rima and I have talked about, in particularly in a Dharma context, that it helps me to see the totality, when the desire is definitely to kind of be like either or, and it almost always is both and, even in its most painful, complex, contradictory moments. And so I would say it's been my practice of Vipassana meditation, and now really cultivating the Brahma Viharas, really cultivating what does it mean to have to practice metta, to practice compassion and vicarious joy and equanimity for everyone, right? Not only those whom I care about, but for those difficult people that I actually try I try to practice that. Because when I talk about ending a world without violence, or co-creating a world without violence, that it's on a spectrum, but I have to think about what are the ways that I am contributing to violence. And that's that hard work. And that's what I appreciated, Sujatha, about what you were sharing in your opening comments, that you were really turning the lens onto yourself, and then looking outward.
Thank you so much for that. That's a lot of beautiful food for thought, and literally your work with love, with accountability. This is, these words, love, forgiveness, compassion, if we knew what they meant, they couldn't be weaponized, right? Like, love is, may you be happy. Compassion is, may you not suffer. So if somebody truly had compassion for someone, right? One of the things we suffer as survivors, right, is, for those of you who don't know, this is a huge part of how Aisha and I know one another, is that we are both survivors, and we've done a lot of work in survivor communities. And and in our own shared survivor Dharma sister journey. And I think that, to say that you love someone who is a survivor, if you truly are interested in their happiness, then attending to, or if you want them to not suffer, right, that the things that really help a person not suffer as a survivor is taking responsibility for your role in their suffering, right? It's one of the things survivors want the most, is for someone to say, this was not your shame, this is not your fault, right? And so if you really want me to not suffer that, then how about saying that? But instead, I have compassion for you. And literally the weaponization has been like that in my own life, where people are like, it was her karma to suffer this, and I have compassion for her. But what they really mean is, that's her fault and I pity her, or I look down on her. And so what we really need to do is learn what these words mean. And if we knew what they truly meant, if we knew what love, compassion meant, then and forgiveness too, it's not a bypass, because it requires understanding the harm. You can't talk about forgiveness without talking about what happened. Forgive what, right? We have to actually name it. And so all of these things are quite more complex than we think. And instead, forgiveness isn't forgetting. Forgiveness is something else. Forgiveness isn't brushing it under the table. It actually is a much deeper practice than that. So thank you for that.
And I think forgiveness has to come from within. Like, we can't force people to forgive. Like, I think that, and for me, that's just something that's also been an ongoing understanding, awakening within myself. I've been thinking, I want to ask you, particularly as a mom, because you are a mother, I am not, of a beautiful teenage boy. I remember, like, when we became friends, we connected 10 years ago, and I want to just say, like, what's been really powerful is to have this deep, we met at this this gathering for childhood sexual abuse survivors, and we were like the two folks who were like, we're going to go meditate. And so, like, that, I just remember that bonding. That was such a powerful and, like, safe space, right? To be in this place where all of us who were there are dealing with our trauma, and, and we were all providing support to each other, but then also to have this other support connection, this Dharma kinship that we've been cultivating, nurturing over the past decade. But just really thinking about, particularly some of the things that you were sharing around those, the cliches and all of that, like, when you're, how are you doing, sharing these teachings with Satya, like, how, in terms of spiritual bypassing, accountability, all of these things, like, how do you pass this on to a teen? Yeah.
I think that my biggest work as a parent is just to listen. It's been really, really, really hard times to be raising a teenager in a pandemic. And on the one hand, I want to help him grow a feeling of resiliency and capacity to, one of the things we talk about, and I have to, again, make sure I'm not weaponizing it against him, is what the Buddha said, do you want to put on a pair of shoes, or do you want to cover the world with leather? Right. And it's a perfect one to weaponize. It could be a perfect way for me to notice that I'm sick of listening to my kid complain about life in the pandemic, and basically tell him it's a way to shut him up. Right. But then there is a point at which I do want to give him tools. So I can't just give him a platitude without a tool. So I am teaching him how to meditate. I'm teaching him just in the brief bits, like, in the end, he has a lot of trouble focusing right now I don't even understand how you would know which kids do and don't have ADHD in the way in which, like, I'm not saying my son has any of this stuff, but it's like, how do I explain it? Every day in school, we get a different email from the principal saying somebody threw a like smoke bomb into the chemistry classroom today. Somebody, lit 3 trash cans on fire in the hallway. Like, it's just, the kids are just not doing well, and they are acting out constantly. And my son is having a really hard time focusing under really distracting circumstances. And so I can't just tell him, well, this is what it is. It is what it is. And, I have to give him a tool, right? And so we have started sitting. The school year ended and I didn't keep up with it, but I will. And I take him on Sundays to my temple and teaching him how to take notes. I don't think he properly learned how to take notes at school. And so I'm like, take notes when Geshe-la is talking, let's take notes and let's talk about, we just started the Lam Rim from scratch at my temple. And so he's getting to start from the very beginning, the graduated stages in the path to enlightenment. So, I struggled, I really did, with never wanting to be a proselytizing parent. As I don't want him to feel pressured to be a Buddhist. And I've been extremely clear that there's no pressure from his father and I, but that I do feel a responsibility for him to have access to the teachings that have helped me so much in my own life. And he is willingly coming every Sunday morning. He gets up and wants to come to the temple. So I'm thrilled. I think another thing, but I think the biggest thing really is to just listen to these kids, just listen and listen and listen and listen. It's something I learned from my sister who's here tonight. She was a great listener to me when I was a young one. It's so important to be heard and to experience it, right? Like, I don't want to teach him. I want him to see the benefits of some of the things that myself and my husband, who's also Buddhist, are trying to grow in ourselves. He's going to actually just see the benefits and feel it, right, from our behavior. So that's a little bit of it. I'm going to give folks just a heads up that if you want to pop questions to either me or Aisha, into the chat, send them to the Seichen Ling. I think you have access to that. The Seichen Ling Center for Tibetan Buddhist Studies. If you want to chat your questions to Seichen Ling, and Gina will scroll through them, and Aisha and I will just keep chatting for a few moments while we do this. So I want to go back to talking about love with accountability for a minute, because I'm just having this huge epiphany that literally your entire project, there's a book project that Aisha was involved in, and these words, love with accountability, I literally never thought of it as a request for us to not spiritual bypass. That's what the whole thing is, in a sense, right? I mean, it's so much more than, I don't want to define your work for you.
No, but you're right. I don't thought, okay. I'm like, oh.
Yeah, so I just wanted to, did that occur to you when you came up with the idea? I mean, because this is a thing that a lot of people who suffer are told all the time. I love you, or, what else? It's but I love you. And especially when people are harming us, but I love you, I didn't mean it. Or, if you were, I really want you to move on from this and just forgive. And, I don't know that you conceptualize it as spiritual bypassing, but now that it's occurred to me, I would love for you.
Yeah, it's so interesting. And to me, it's very interesting. And I don't think now coincidental at all that literally the words just kind of came to me. I mean, I remember where I was exactly on the cushion, how I just remember it all. And I didn't think of it. It wasn't this is the antidote to spiritual bypassing. It wasn't that at all. And while it definitely, its response in the anthology is about in response to childhood sexual abuse, it is something that I now see, and definitely central to childhood sexual abuse, but it's broader. It's everywhere. We need love with accountability everywhere. It's something that I've talked about this extensively with one of my dear friends, Glenda Gracia, around just the power of accountability and love. That they're not in opposition to each other, and accountability isn't punishment. It's not retribution, but it is asking for responsibility. And I think to ground it in love, Yeah, I hadn't until this very moment in this context, I hadn't thought about it, but it definitely was a response to bypassing, because that's what it wasn't spiritual necessarily, but that's what I was being told. Like, we love you. You look at our track record. Stop. Move on. And there was something that just wasn't sitting right, and I couldn't force it at the time. So I just literally had, just was like, how can I respond? I'm very grateful that in time that my mother was the first to really begin to take the steps to be responsible and accountable, and she actually wrote about it in the anthology. She has a piece in the anthology where she writes about how she did not protect me, and and being accountable there. And then my father and I, and right now, actually the heart of the pandemic in various parts of the country, country at that point, because on Zoom did a lot, just really profound accountability work there. And so it's very, and I think there's something for me in terms of my understanding about bypass. So I mean, I start, my opening comments were really in a spiritual context, but I think I saw it as coming out, growing up, being raised in a very radical political part of family, right? Just seeing the bypass there, right? Like that incredible work that they have done and continue to do well into their 70s, and yet here was this tremendous injustice being done that they wanted to bypass. So I think that there was definitely a depth of understanding. It just got, I think, a little kind of complicated for me, and as things can get in spiritual context, around seeing the bypass. But so I think there's something really powerful that in this family triangle between my parents and I, and then how spirituality, my spiritual practice, really enabled us to kind of break through this standstill, with basically saying we're not bystanding, we're going to face this head on.
Thank you so much for that. It's really, really powerful, really beautiful. Do we want to go to a question from the chat? Please. How about that? Gina, why don't you just pick one that comes to the top of your mind, or whichever one came in first, whatever.
Sure. The first question was actually about self-cherishing. And this is a person who says he's a relatively new Buddhist, a convert from a religious tradition that emphasized self-emptying, self-giving, self-forgetfulness in ways that were not healthy and caused him personal harm. In learning more about Vajrayana, they keep running into the term self-cherishing thought, and it raises alarms, hearkening this person back to bad experiences with their former religion. So how can they understand self-cherishing thought in a healthy way?
Wow, that is a very powerful question. And one of the things about these Dharma chats and our trepidatiousness as students ourselves and not Dharma teachers per se, I'll take this one a little bit, if that's okay with you, Aisha, and try to keep it within the realm of sort of what my capacity to explain these things is. So there, one of the things, like having strong self-esteem, having a positive self-regard is a wonderful thing. In relative reality, we have to have a certain level of confidence. And that is actually lauded by many of the teachers that I have heard, right? That you have to be confident and you have to have a positive sense of self in order to practice the Buddha Dharma, right? So that's not the kind of thing that we are talking about when we say self-cherishing. The negative self-cherishing is in our distorted notion of self, right? This like reified I that we cling to, that ego grasping, is the thing that, and it's a misperception of a reified, truly existent self that everything just refers back to over and over again. This is deeply oversimplified, but these very fixed, rigid notions of self, the notion of a truly existent self that we cling to and that we do everything for, and that we feed that ego, that's what is meant by that self-cherishing, is my understanding of it. And that always leads you down a bad road. But it's not the same thing. I think that there are many, many examples of incredible Buddhist teachers and lay people who practice, who are incredibly self-aware, self-confident, are incredibly grateful for their human existence, to be of benefit to others. Like, those are really good things, and it's good to have positive feelings about that. So that is not a bad thing. That is not what is meant by like the negative and self-cherishing thoughts, right? That's the distinction I would draw. And I think it's really important to just really briefly to look at what other religious hangovers that we have as we come to a new religious tradition. And I know everyone here isn't necessarily Buddhist, but I think that for those of us who switch from one religion to another, it's really good to be aware of whether or not we are taking the meaning of the languages, the words from other language. Like, I had a huge shift to make from Hinduism to Buddhism, where literally we are using the exact same words. So many things come from similar and like very nearly identical traditions, and I've had to be extremely careful to understand what words we're using in what context and what they mean in this context instead of that context. So I wish the person who asked that question much luck as they journey on in the shift. Yeah.
Thank you. The next question is from a climate justice organizer. After almost 7 years of organizing in transformative justice, and this person is realizing how they use bypassing to keep involved in the work, but how much bypassing is too much bypassing. And how do we sit with knowing we bypass as a need, and how do we get back to being real? They say it's been a decade for them, a journey of realizing and understanding when to go in, when to observe, and when to go numb.
Powerful. Aisha, do you want to take that? Or
I'm a little confused about the question in terms of how spiritual bypass relates to the climate change. That's what I'm trying to, so.
My guess is that they're referencing the thing that I was talking about with the whole, like, looking to outer space to be free, or it's the whole everything changes and don't worry, and like numbing out or bypassing the horror of what they are dealing with every day in order to stay in the work. Like, I think that's kind of what the question's about.
I think so, Sujatha. They said it's similar to your comment from before.
Yeah. I can jump in a little bit.
Yeah. I'll jump in. Go ahead.
Yeah, think about it too, Aisha. I'd love to know your thoughts on this. I don't think that there's any specific, like, there's nobody like watching who's going to tell you like, you've numbed out, you've binge scrolled through Hubble. Like, there's some alarm that's going to go off on my phone that says, Sujatha, you have been looking at Webb telescope pictures for 45 minutes now. Time to stop, right? I think, I wonder about like the pausing or the diminishing returns on those kinds of things, like pausing when there's sort of diminishing returns. Like, my gut tells me when it's been too much, but I also want to make a little plug for like not confusing spiritual bypass for the need to quit for a while or take breaks. And I know that this is a statement I'm going to make from a place of incredible privilege, to be able, like, I'm kind of on sabbatical right now, and I have the privilege to be on sabbatical and working constantly directly in the field of death penalty work, of sexual violence. All the things I've done were wrecking me, and I desperately want to go. I'm like, when is my kid going to be old enough for me to go on those 30-day retreats that Aisha used to do? Do I get to do one of those sometime too? And not just to get away from parenting and nonprofit life and all of that, but really, but there's also like a desire to actually practice in a deeper way. And that's not bypassing. That's actually building a muscle that you may bring back to the work. Or I sometimes feel like there might be 12 people sitting in caves in the Himalayas that their prayers and their practice are actually holding the world together right now. Like, what do we know? And so that's not doing the work. And so I think, pausing, breathing, taking a moment to look at the stars, keeping our eyes on the horizon, that's not necessarily bagging out, right? So you're going to have to check your gut. If you're noticing that you're not going to work for weeks and weeks because you're literally binge watching stuff that's utterly not good for you on Netflix for weeks and weeks and weeks, then okay, you know what's happening there. But none of that is spiritual bypassing, right? That's just checking ourselves to say, when are we burnt out, or when do I need to do something else? When do I need to change lanes? There are a million different things we could do to be of benefit in the world. Maybe the one I'm doing is burning me out. Like, it's okay to check in with ourselves about those things. So that's what I would say about that. Don't know if that's exactly on point. I hope it's useful.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to echo what you're sharing, Sujatha. I mean, I think that I think it's really important that we know when that we know and recognizing that for some of us it's not an option, it's not a choice. So I want to be really mindful of that. But for those of us where we do have some, relatively speaking, spaciousness to make a choice, to know like when it's time to come in from the fire, right? Like we don't, so many of us are wounded healers. We're not, we're like, our skin is falling off while we're trying to put on other people's skin. And so I just think that it's really important that we take care of ourselves, hopefully not at the expense of others, and then and strengthen ourselves, and then go back in. Like I kind of, what I would love to see is like this, almost either a relay race, some kind of, or I don't like a race, but like circle with concentric circles where, I go in, I'm sitting in the fire, however we define what the fire is, and then I come out, and then somebody else comes in. I think that sometimes when we zone out or zone in, depending on what the language, it's in response to, it's too much, we're like, we're burning out, we're not taking care. And I think that also can be an inadvertent form. I know for myself, I've been like, what am I not dealing with by putting all this energy here? That I'm only speaking about myself, looking at that, and then and look, there's so much that we could all be working 24/7, 365 on, on so many, issues that are happening from any angle that you're looking at. And so, but there is we really cannot live without our lives in so many ways. And I think in order to do our best work, in order to cause the least amount of harm as possible, we need to make sure that we are connected and grounded, so that when we're moving with discernment, we're moving with wisdom. And it's really hard to do that when you're just washed out and burned out.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you for that.
Okay.
Do you want to give us another question?
I do. We've actually got a couple of questions really on this same topic. And first I want to say, we're getting, of course, a lot of comments from people just saying thank you. Like they're really appreciative of hearing your stories and the advice that you're able to give. And along those lines, we've gotten a couple of different questions on the topic of spiritual bypassing within Dharma communities, and specifically sexual violence that may have taken place within Dharma communities. And the way one person presented it, that having two survivors makes this the perfect moment to gain some wisdom and healing around this. So I thought we'd be remiss to not make sure that we covered this, that we raised the question, brought the question to you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Aisha, do you want to go first, or you want me to? You choose.
I'll let you go first. I need to think. I want to think about it because there's so much I want to say. So I want to.
Yeah, of course. So it is so critical that we learn to name sexual harm wherever it happens and whenever it happens. And it is so critical that we do it in the places that it feels the scariest to do. And so it is, sexual harm occurs everywhere, all over the world, in every institution, in every community, in every kind of family, in every culture. There is nowhere that it is not happening. It happens in every religion, in every religious institution. There's no way to avoid it at this moment. I pray for a day and I worked for a day in which we have no more sexual harm. But it does occur. And I think I have received calls over the years from people in different sort of from different Dharma centers, and where I have heard about sexual harm occurring in people in positions of leadership. Sometimes I've heard about teachers. And, I think that it is incredibly important for us to start to admit that these things do occur everywhere, right? We have learned from the Catholic Church that it does not behoove us to shove anything under the carpet. And so I think that when I think about being a good Dharma student and being someone who is deeply committed to the longevity of the perfectly pure teachings that have come from the Buddha, it is, there's nothing in contradiction to that, to name that there are people who are operating outside of it. And it is actually protecting the Buddha Dharma to make sure that there are not teachers who have fallen, or people who are in positions of authority, or even just co-practitioners in your center running around doing stuff that is something the Buddha would never say is okay, right? The Dalai Lama has been extremely clear on all of this, right? This stuff is not okay. It needs to be named. People cannot continue to operate in their teacher positions if they have caused harm. People should not be in positions of leadership and authority if they are abusing their power to do things that are exactly the opposite of what the Buddha has asked us to do. So on a very basic level, this is simple. When people are being harmed, we need to name it and bring it out. If we believe, again, in the words love and compassion, may people be happy, may they not suffer. Surely they should not be suffering sexual harm in their own religious communities, right? And so I think it is honoring the teachings of the Buddha to name when his students and or people who are teaching even have gone astray. I think that there is a lot of confusion in also, I think, independently, as things leave the places and cultures, and I'm not saying that there's no sexual harm that is happening in Asia, but I am also saying that I've heard a lot more about this here in the United States. And then when things get further and further away from sort of people who have been holding lineages, I think sometimes a lot of the teachings can get muddled and confused, and harm can flow from that. And so, yeah, I think that that's all I'll say for now, is that we need to be brave and name things to someone you truly trust. And if, I was extremely gifted by having this person, my sister, be the first person I ever told. And there she is. And she believed me, and I am so lucky, right? To have a person that you can tell who's going to believe you about what's going on is a really great place to start, and to put some minds together about, okay, how do we move forward from here? Oh my goodness. It can feel very scary in a family institution. It can feel very scary in a religious institution. And just please know that if you are interested in any religious tradition out there in the world, Christianity, Buddhism, Hinduism, whatever, there will be other places where you can learn the same and similar things where this harm is not happening, and you will find your way there. So that is the number one thing. If a place doesn't feel safe for you to practice, it's okay to switch lineages. It's okay to find other teachers. It's okay to do what you need to do. You don't have to give up your religion because harm has happened. You can find another home that is safe in which to practice. So I would say that.
Thank you, Sujatha. I think I'll start with where you ended by just saying that I think it's really important. And I know it can be hard when a place that you determine and feel has been your spiritual home, to leave it if need be. But I think that that's really, if that's what is needed, that I do believe you can leave. I believe you can leave. I encourage people to leave, but does not mean that you have to leave the teachings or those things that were most dear to you. I think that we have to really, again, echoing what Sujatha shared, is just to be open to the possibility that someone whom we may love and revere and care about may have also caused harm. I think that part of so much silence and that happens is because we are attached, right? Here's a big word in all, teachings in Buddhism. We're attached to who the person is, how we view the person, or be it the harm doer or the person who's been victimized, that we're attached, and that therefore we cannot see beyond our attachment, which is why I talked about, and this is not a religious context, my grandfather, who definitely took the night away from me as a child, and it's the same person who took care of his wife selflessly 24/7 365 for 10 years. And so for people who met that man, it may be hard for them to grapple with that same person did this to me. So people can have different, not necessarily, I'm not saying like split personalities, but I'm just saying in different contexts move in different ways. So I think it really is important to believe and support folks who have said they've been harmed, and even if you have questions, to at least be present for them, and not do the cross-examination of them, but then to kind of do some inquiries, looking into it. For me, this is some of the things that I've said in other contexts, not sexual violence, but in other contexts in my former communities. Like, if we cannot trust our practice to enable us to be with the discomfort, to be with the suffering, to be with the pain, and to look within, and to really cultivate wisdom, to cultivate compassion and metta. If we can't do that, then what are we doing? And so I think I'm very clear, I'm speaking as a Buddhist, but I believe this in all traditions, that we really have to be willing to face that which we may not want to face, and not be willing to sacrifice those who've been harmed. That is antithetical, I would say, to most of these sacred texts and teachings that we are now practicing in the 21st century. I think that's really important. As difficult as it may be, we have to be willing to do that, to ask people to step down if they are in authoritative positions, or to ask folks to step aside if they are in the Sangha. And I'm not saying throw people away either. I want to be clear. It's not about throwing people away. It's back to that love with accountability. But it is making sure that there are brave spaces, because it is only through brave space that safe and sacred spaces can emerge.
So beautiful. Thank you. I think we're gonna actually close out as we're coming up on the hour. And I know people are doing this in so many different time zones. I just think that maybe in closing, one last thought I would say is, with all of this, the spiritual bypass is really about saying the glass is full when it's half full. And we really have to be very clear that the glasses are both half full and half empty. How can we acknowledge this in ourselves and in others, right? And to not be saying that, a lot of what we're hearing in the sexual abuse and spiritual harm sort of conglomeration is like, but I love you, or, you'll hurt the institution if, and, the institution may have been doing really wonderful things also. You may have gained a lot from it, right? You can't use like, you're going to harm the sacred spiritual thing, or that, or when people are saying that they care about us and they love us when they're causing us harm, like that's not love. We have to see things with a clear eye, right? You can't say that things are all good when they have some work to be done on them. So I would just encourage people to hold that in their hearts as well. So let's take a moment now to close out as we think about all the things that we had the courage and the strength to grapple with tonight. Just so very grateful. Grateful always to Seichen Ling for bringing Aisha and I back here to talk about some of the hard stuff and the things that we grapple with. It's really just an incredible blessing to have this time with you all. And let's do a little bit of getting back in touch with our breath, remembering that our breath is here as our dear and constant friend. Just really feeling that breath. The breath is there. Helping us anchor to the present moment. And as we close out tonight, let's take a moment to think of all the merits, all the positivity that we've increased through our sharing, and our questions, and our listening, and our deep consideration of challenging things. And let's dedicate those merits that we've all individually and collectively gathered tonight to the benefit of all sentient beings. And let's have these wishes in our hearts as we move forward tonight and through the rest of the week and the weekend. May we all be free from spiritual bypassing and from all the internal and external causes of spiritual bypassing. May we have the strength and the courage to lean into people's suffering here on this very planetary realm, and to do so with our eyes wide open and with compassion. May we have the courage to be accountable when we have been made aware that we've caused harm. And may we have support to be accountable. And may we have support when we ask for accountability. May we seek ultimate truths without closing our eyes, hands, hearts, and minds to relative reality as it currently operates. May all beings be happy. May all beings be free from oppression and from all forms of suffering. May all beings have what they need for their well-being. May all beings be peaceful and at ease. Thank you all so much. Thank you, Gina. I don't know if you have any closing comments before we go.
Just to say thank you, Sujatha and Aisha. It's a gift to have you with us. Your talks are always inspiring, they're challenging, and they're healing. And we're just very happy that we could share your voice and your time with us. And we hope that you'll please come back. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for your presence. Thank you and sharing.
Thanks so much, everyone. Okay.
Thank you, everyone, for being here. Good night.